Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
Well, first of all, you got to fire. You got to fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and you got to fire this. Obviously, you're going to bring in a new Secretary of Defense, but any general that was involved, general, admiral, whatever that was involved in any of the DEI woke, it's got to go. Either you're in for war fighting, and that's it. That's the only litmus test we care about. You got to get DEI and CRT out of military academies, so you're not training young officers to be baptized in this type of thinking. And then, whatever the standards, whatever the combat standards were, say, in, 1995, let's just make those the standards. And as far as recruiting, to hire the guy that, did Top Gun Maverick and create some real ads that motivate people to want to serve. There's an ethos change. There's a reason people don't want to serve, because they don't trust. And that trust is broken. And you have to reestablish that trust by putting in no-nonsense warfighters in those positions who aren't going to cater to the socially correct garbage.
America's military is weakened, and we must fix it. And we have that opportunity. Welcome back to Truth Thursday here on the Rob Maness Show. And we are live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. And we're also on Truth Social now, folks. So go follow at Rob Maness and at Worldview Tube over there on Truth Social. Well, we see it every day. Our ships look like rust buckets. We can't man them in order to utilize the entire fleet we have because we don't have enough people. Drones are flying at will over our most sensitive military bases inside our country without being challenged by our installation commanders. China's Navy and Air Forces challenge us and our allies every single day. They're running their third exercise to blockade Taiwan as I speak to you. We have failed to deter Russia, who is now firing medium-range ballistic missiles with multiple reentry vehicle conventional weapons at will. And now our military intelligence has once again failed to provide adequate warning about the fall of Syria's government, whether you agree with it or not, whether you think it's a good thing or not. It's bad that they didn't tell us again. But help is on the way. And we're even beginning to hear anecdotally that retention may be coming up and recruiting may be about to turn around since Donald Trump was reelected. A big part of the answer to repairing our armed forces is the plan to take care of our people, fund the necessary manpower requirements, and eliminate those that are not, and provide the right leadership to implement these actions. That can get us back on track. Well, my guest today is Stephen Simmons, who was a prior enlisted Marine Corps major who served as a combat engineer and a civil affairs planner. He's deployed to Iraq, supported multiple humanitarian missions, and is a recognized subject matter expert in total force manpower policy and planning, and distinguished himself operationally working within the aviation ground support areas. Stephen worked with multiple media and congressional offices to highlight the constitutional crisis resulting from the unlawful vaccine mandates, upholding his oath to protect readiness and the Constitution. Stephen was forced to leave active service because of his actions, and since then has excelled in the civilian sector, working for Amazon, where he managed multi-billion-dollar programs. Listen to that, multi-billion-dollar programs. Stephen, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us. This subject may seem a bit esoteric to some, manpower. What is it? But it's really it's people policy, and you wrote a great article. Tell folks where they can find that on your Substack.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob, and thanks for having me. Like I said, yeah, manpower is a dry subject matter, but it's very important because it's not just about the people; it's all about the people at the end of the day, and every real military leader knows that. But yeah, I wrote an article, actually, a manpower vision for 2025 under what it would look like under a President Trump administration, and it's on my Substack at Simmons Actual, and Simmons Actual is also my handle on Twitter. I've got it posted up there as well. So invite anybody to come read it. It's a long read. I did put an executive summary up there up front, so feel free to take 5 minutes to read the exec summary and then peruse at your convenience. But try to get into the how we're going to fix this, not just the quick talking point answer.
Yeah, Pete Hegseth in the opening clip, he laid out some things. Some of them are really, and a lot of it is really associated with manpower and personnel policy and those kind of things. But you mentioned in your article that it's been 70 years since manpower policy has really been addressed in an adequate way. Really? That long? I mean, I retired in 2011, and I was a wing commander, so a base commander with about 23,000 people working on the base. And I wasn't aware that it had been that long.
Yeah, I mean, there's been minor updates and changes, obviously, very minor incremental things. But what we see today is very much the same manpower policies that were put in place under Goldwater Nichols back in the 50s. And so, I was very curious. My grandfather actually served in Korea. He was a Marine First Sergeant and actually had a Marine Corps manpower book. And so I opened it up, just perused it one day, and was shocked to see that really none of the policies had fundamentally changed at all. And we're fighting wars in the 21st century now. Things have changed drastically. And what I noticed in my time working at Headquarters Marine Corps, doing manpower, working retention, our manpower policies were actually very slow and very far behind, as much as the rest of the service was being required to evolve to meet today's threats.
Yeah. You hit 8 key areas in the article, which, folks, you got to go check it out at Simmons Actual on Substack, because it is a good read. It's long, but it's a fast read, or at least it was for me. But then again, I'm used to some of the jargon and stuff, although you stay away from most of that. But let's walk through those 8 points, see if we can get through it in this hour. Restoration of trust. I mean, that's what Hegseth was talking about. That's why I chose that clip to lead this show off. I think that's your number one area that you highlight. Am I right to assume that these are in order of importance and priority as you step through your thought process on this? Because trust and restoring it, both in ourselves as members of the military and the leadership, both civilian and military, in the Department of Defense, I think it's critically important, because it's been completely trashed since Obama, really.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. And the trust is it's a core tenet of everything we do. In the military, and really in everything we do in life, we're in the trust business. And if you can't have trust and maintain trust between leader and led follower, and the within the business and among peers, you're not going to get very far as an organization, especially as a military or a competent fighting force. So you are correct. I kind of listed these in priority of precedent, or things that I think, like things that need to happen like maybe day one, and then other things that can happen the afternoon of day one, because it is absolutely important. I think the first period that we have to do is restore trust. We're starting to see those anecdotal feedback right now of higher recruiting, higher retention rates, which means the rank and file military members are believing what the new administration stands for. They are excited about the leadership that Pete Hegseth is demonstrating, that President Trump is demonstrating. And so I think we're seeing a little bit of that. But in order to close the deal, have to send clear messages that trust is restored. There has been a lot of violations of trust over the last 4 years, as we well know, and I don't want to get too far into that. So I think very deliberate, immediate action to restore that trust is critical on day one to set up everything else and all the rest of the reforms that have to follow.
What type of actions? What are those actions that you propose for those day 1 through 100? I guess, but really critically, the day one actions that a Secretary of Defense Hegseth and his team need to sign off on and get implemented right away in order to restore that.
Absolutely. So, Rob, over the last 4 years, the military, we know that they purged at least 95,000 service members, about 60,000 active, about 35,000 reserve, and don't have an exact number because there's a lot of obfuscation going on with numbers. And I provided you some of those details, and we can get into that later. But we know that there are about 95,000 service members who were forced out because of either the vaccine mandates. Myself included, I spoke out a lot about that and was forced out. There were those that maybe they complied, but they didn't like complying, and so they said, "I'm done. As soon as my enlistment's over, I'm leaving." And then there were a lot that were just utterly disgusted with the shameful Afghanistan withdrawal and everything that happened with the military. And obviously, we saw we saw readiness going down. We saw less training and more focus on DEI initiatives, and a general disillusionment from the rank and file military members. And to be clear, the war fighters, the ones that actually pull the triggers and make our military institution work, they were the ones that were leaving en masse. So we know that there's 95,000 out there, and we know that because of defense manpower data that is provided on the DMDC website. I just pulled those numbers, and there was a 95,000 differential between 2021 and 2023. We don't know exactly why, and that may be shadowed more because they may have lowered standards to keep more people in or pull people in that otherwise shouldn't have stayed in. But we know that 95,000 left. So I think day one have to view this as an illegal force shaping tool that occurred, and using existing law and policies that go around force shaping. If you're going to downsize the force, you have to offer service members SEPS pay. You have to offer them a chance to compete. Have to go back and work to restore those service members, and whether that's invite them to come back to service, offer them SEPS pay because they were illegally separated or forced to separate under duress, bring them back into the fold. And even if they don't come back, what's important to this is something called generational damage. And we see this with legacies. I believe Mike Berry calls it legacies, but within recruiting, you've got very strong recruitment ties to communities, especially religious communities, rural communities, and then legacies who are prior service families. My son is statistically more likely to serve in the military because I served. Similar, my family served, so I was more likely to serve. And I think most of your listeners would probably agree that there is a component to that. And what's happened is we now have potentially 95,000 families that have chosen to leave service, are disaffected, and their prodigy, their next generation may not choose to serve, or their community. And that's a huge impact long-term to recruiting that's going to go beyond this year or next year or 20 years from now. So taking a proactive step to restore their service now, that's going to stop the bleeding. The first rule of if you're in a hole, to get out of that hole, first thing you have to do is stop digging. And this would be an action to stop digging. We saw this with Vietnam a little bit. Military recruiting after Vietnam never really fully recovered until we got into Desert Storm, and then even after that, it really wasn't until 2001 that we saw recruiting actually finally bounce back because of that disaffected population coming out of Vietnam. We don't want to repeat that now and be dealing with another generational recruitment crisis, especially with the enemies that are at our gates, such as China and Russia and other powers that would more than happily challenge us locally or regionally if they had the chance.
Yeah, I'm a member of a what we call them on our side generational military service family that goes all the way back to 1775 on my dad's side, and I stopped recruiting in 2021 because I just said they're not listening to us on on the endless war policy. We're making all these decisions about mandatory vaccines that are experimental, et cetera. So I just stopped recruiting. I have started recruiting again. I made an announcement after Trump was reelected that I would do that and commit to that. But I think those families, they have to see the actual rubber meeting the road before they get fully on board. So that's why I like this idea that restoration of trust is the policy events that will make that solid, and bring it on board. Well, we got to take our first break, Stephen. When we come back, though, we'll see another clip. This one, I think, is going to be about peace through strength and President Trump's policies, and then we'll tie that to recruiting and retention and restoration of the officer corps and what it takes to be able to implement that policy adequately through personnel. We'll be right back with former Marine Major Stephen Simmons.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
We've got the risk of China possibly taking Taiwan. In the second Trump term, we've got the explosive powder keg in the Middle East. We've got Ukraine. When there's a lot going on that could potentially involve our military at a time where the American public's really not feeling all that interventionist. So how do you look at those conflicts and the role of the military in a 2024 or 2025 America?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I look to the Commander-in-Chief's direction on that. I mean, his America First agenda and how he wants to adapt and adjust the way we focus on threats. He's the boss. I'm an execution arm, and my job is to give him advice as it pertains to our military and its ability to execute on that. Ultimately, we live in one of the most dangerous times since the end of the Cold War. There's just no doubt about it. You've refined it. But I'm also the product of 2 decades of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, where my view shifted a great deal from where it was to where it is today, because you would have to be a fool to look at the outcomes in Iraq and Afghanistan and think that what we got out of them was beneficial to American national security interests. And that's not to take away from every vet who gave everything. I was one of them. Those last folks in Afghanistan, the 13 we lost, the people who fought for the places that ISIS took back, like that investment, that fight, that mission is real, and I love all of it. But we have to be realists and clear-eyed about what that intervention meant. The finite resources that we have, the debt that we have, the threats that we have, the responsibilities our allies have to show in Europe if they want to defend that continent. The reality of the outcome in Ukraine, Donald Trump's been very clear about that, but that he wants to end it right away. And that ultimately there's this huge looming threat in the Indo-Pacific, in the Communist Chinese, who are rapidly trying to build a military that outpaces ours, building a military trying to defeat us. So I don't want to get ahead of the president at all on any of this. Part of the reason you don't normally do interviews in a confirmation process is that anything you say will be used against you in the court of a hearing. So these are all things I've said before and the president has said. But ultimately, yes, we live in a dangerous world, which means if you're going to have peace through strength, you need to have the perception and the reality of a hyper-ready force ready to take on the next threat.
A hyper-ready force. Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show here. It's Truth Thursday, and we're talking with former U.S. Marine Corps Major Stephen Simmons, who is a manpower planning and policy expert, about the manpower and personnel policies that need to change in order to fix the U.S. military. So it is that hyper-ready, lethal entity that will deter an adversary like the Communist Chinese. And Stephen, in your article, you hit 2 points close together there: recruiting and retention, and restoring the officer corps. What are those key policy initiatives from a manpower perspective that we need to hit on recruiting and retention? And we can't just rely on the positive side effects of a Trump reelection.
Absolutely, Rob. And I think recruiting and retention, there's a lot of details that go into it. Like, we can invest a whole lot of money into catchy campaigns to attract the youth, get a viral video or an ad or, a full-length movie. I mean, Top Gun was awesome. Everybody knows that. But there's a lot of policy that has to go into recruiting and retention. And I'll start with the first one is removing barriers to service. Right now, the statistics are coming out that there's really only about 23% of military-aged men and women in America at this point are even eligible to serve, and of those, only about 7% are even remotely interested in doing that. So there's a very, very small population that is eligible for military service, and the reality is, does military service look like it did back in Vietnam? Do we need everybody to be able to hump a 100-pound pack, or do we need somebody who can operate a drone? So I think we need to take a really hard look at maybe going a little bit more granular with how do we bring in the right recruits for the right jobs, and then being willing to waive or look at waivers for certain medical conditions. There's been a few pilots that have been incredibly successful, but I saw a statistic, and I actually put it in the paper itself, but 45% of medical or potential recruits that get disqualified because of medical conditions, they don't even bother to submit for a waiver, request a waiver. We need to get that process to be automatic, so they go up for a waiver, and that right there would increase potential recruits by up to 10,000 alone, because most medical waivers actually are approved. Beyond that, there's a whole lot of work that we could do within retention. And one thing I'd call out is we put a lot of barriers artificially, very bureaucratic, and most of it's designed to keep people in and keep them from ever leaving in the first place. But we need to remove barriers to retention or coming back into the service. So off-contract sessions. Service member got out, they did their 4 years active, 4 years in inactive reserve. They spent another 2 years doing something else, decided, hey, I really want to come back. They've already served. If they're otherwise qualified, we should be rushing to sign whatever and get them back in. And right now we make them basically go through an entire re-enlistment process all the way, going from step one, and we make it incredibly painful. We also make it incredibly painful for people to leave who may need a career intermission or something like that. You've got somebody who wants to go to college. Well, you know what? Great. Sign here, take a 4-year break, go to college, come back, and we will gladly bring you back. So I think it's a mindset shift, but it's also what we're doing right now is working with Gen Z population. I think I added, either tweeted it out or something, but we're using Gen X tactics to recruit the millennials, when actually the population that's the military age population that we want to recruit is Gen Z. And Gen Z is interesting. They have a absolute desire and will to serve. They want to be a part of things that are bigger than them. But they also are very impervious to any kind of media campaigns or hype or buzz. They want real, and so we need to retool our recruiting tactics. And my suspicion is, dollar for dollar, the recruiter that's out in the field is probably doing more to bring in Gen Z candidates than the multi-million-dollar ads that we're spending at the Super Bowl and things like that. And I think we need to take a really careful look at pound for pound, where's our recruiting coming from? How do we interact with these populations and get the most bang for our buck and get the most lethal force in? And right now, I think we're severely limiting ourselves on a whole host of fronts just through recruiting policy.
Yeah, when I was a commander, the Gen Z folks were most of the folks that I dealt with. I mean, under 23 years of age, born in that era. and everything. And the tricky part with them was you had to meet them where they were at in order to really be able to effectively communicate with them. You couldn't even get them in an auditorium in a commander's call and effectively really communicate with them. So I did a lot of leading by walking around and driving around and take my command chief with me and go, all right, take me out to this area. I want to talk to the men and women that are doing this specific job. And that is why the recruiters that are in the field are probably so much more effective. And we can use TV ads, I think, but it's got to be at a really high level, and they've got to be you got to be able to put Top Gun in 30 seconds, because that's the attention span that we're talking about, being the dad of a 20-year-old right now. What about fixing the officer corps and restoring that? What's going on in that? We hear about all this DEI stuff and wokeism and the service academies, and then the failures at the general officer level from a leadership perspective and an oath-keeping perspective. What are the policy levers we need to pull right away under a Trump administration to restore the officer corps?
Yeah, and Rob, I'm glad you got to this, because I think this has come to the forefront of the news recently, especially with the West Point flap, and we've seen firsthand where a politicized, DEI-focused officer corps has lost sight of their mission and ultimately the role of a military officer to be apolitical and focused on lethality. So I put this in here, and there's a lot to unpack, but I would submit that President Trump, Pete Hegseth, if they want to make a change, it's not just about firing somebody at the top. You have to change the institution, because the individual that's coming in behind them is going to do the exact same thing. We've ingrained institutional malfeasance into the system, and until we break that institution's focus on DEI, focus on politicization, we're not going to change the officer corps. Now, the officer corps kind of paid attention to them a lot, because leadership starts at the top. You fix the officer corps, you fix so many things, and you have to fix it at multiple levels. And my worry is, and I'll say it emphatically, the DEI, the politicization, the entry points of that into the military has been the service academies, and it's been our PME institutions. And so under our own policies, we have officers to advance. They have to get commissioned. They have to go to a school that is not well screened. And at this point, that includes the service academies. And then for them to promote and advance, they have to go to professional military education schools, these service level schools that typically last about a year. And they go there, and there is jokingly in the Marine Corps, it is called the field grade lobotomy. And we see majors go to command and staff, and they come back and they have bought into the institution hook, line, and sinker, and it's very hard to get them back out of it. So I think we need to take a really careful look at these schools and what we're sending and what is being taught. I think we need to keep a close tab on how tethered do we need officers to be to operational forces. And what we see is a lot of officers will go to these schools, and then because they go to the schools and they do well, they drink the Kool-Aid, they go to more schools, and now we call them experts. And some they've not hit a line unit, they've not deployed in a decade, and they're the same ones that are making policy. Not to say there's some, we need some very talented subject matter experts in certain areas that do big data or something like that we absolutely need. But I think we need to take a very close look at those professional schools. On the service academy side, though, we need to pay attention to entry points into officers. And Rob, you and I are both prior enlisted. You know what that credibility brings, as well as that perspective. And I suspect you never asked your troops to do anything that you wouldn't personally do yourself, myself included. And so I think we talk about getting rid of DEI quotas. The one quota I think we should include is actually making sure there's a very clear balance of entry between service academies, prior enlisted, as well as raw off the street talent that's coming from a college and ROTC environment. And I think if we pay attention to that more across the services, we're going to get a much better balanced service in terms of leadership. That we do want we do want diversity of thought. We do, if you had an entire regiment with nothing but service academy grads, it would be a very dull regiment, and they would have a single focus on, only a couple things. You need a prior enlisted leader to shake things up. You need some really smart individual that comes in off the street with 3 master's degrees and has a completely different perspective. Not saying we should get rid of that, but I'm saying we should balance that out and make sure that what we're pulling in officers from all types, and that's going to counteract the DEI swing and the politicization that we've seen in the past.
Absolutely right. Well, we got to take another break, and I see the hands over the audience, Shell, so we'll take some questions when we come back, but we'll also see a clip and we'll talk about the numbers of generals and admirals we have today versus World War II, and a little bit of insight as to what the experts think why that is in this opening clip here on the Rob Maness Show. It's Truth Thursday. We got to fix the military. The opening shot and pathway to doing that is through personnel and manpower policy. We're talking with former U.S. Marine Corps Major Steve Simmons about that very thing right now. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Is the government tracking you? Do they have access to all your data? Well, if you go to worldviewtalk.com, you'll find out about a cell phone company that, does not store your data. They don't do that. This is what they're known for. They don't store your data. You have privacy. You're not being tracked. That's why a lot of folks are turning to worldviewtalk.com. You'll find their prices are very competitive. All the details are there at worldviewtalk.com. Again, worldviewtalk.com. Oh, while you're there, not only do they have cell phones that aren't tracking you, you can find out about how to get a satellite phone. Should the whole system go down and you want to communicate with a family member or a loved one, you might want to have a satellite phone. Or how about their solar generators? They have great solar generators. Check them all out right now. Worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com.
The United States currently has 44 active duty 4-star generals and admirals, a significant increase compared to the mere 7 4-star generals during World War II, despite the far larger scale of that conflict. This disparity reflects changes in military structure, technology, and geopolitical strategy. In World War II, the focus was on managing massive conventional forces and theaters of war, requiring fewer top-level commanders. Today, the military operates in a far more complex global environment, with responsibilities spanning cyber warfare, space operations, and diverse regional commands, each requiring specialized leadership. Additionally, the modern military's peacetime operations, joint force structures, and evolving threats contribute to the increased number of 4-star officers, underscoring the expanded scope of U.S. military engagements in the 21st century.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. Here it's Truth Thursday. We're talking about how we've got to fix the military, and the pathway to do that is through manpower and personnel policy. Really, we have the gear. Look, we have the best gear that money can buy. We're always on the leading edge of new technologies when it comes to getting that gear to the troops in the field that are the actual trigger pullers and missile shooters and killers. So we have that part. We could be a lot faster in our acquisition programs and clean that up, and that's on the block as far as reform goes. It has to be done in a massive way that's never been done before. But really, it's about personnel and manpower at the initial point to fix what is wrong. And I think that a huge part of what is wrong is we have way too many generals and admirals today. And we're talking with former Marine Corps Major Steve Simmons, who is a manpower planning and policy expert about these issues today. Steve, you talk about this in your article, in your proposals, that we've got to improve the leader to lead ratio and move it back to where it's more logical. And now at the end of that clip at the opening there, I don't know if you got to see it or not, there's a little propagandizing about, well, this is why we have so many of these. None of those reasons, to me, as somebody that served for over 30 years, from E1 to 06, none of those reasons really fell on my ears as valid reasons to have these high numbers. How do we fix that?
Hey, Rob. Yeah, Yeah, I think the article I cited, we went from, and it's not just generals, but we went from 7.8 enlisted for every one officer in back in the 70s in Vietnam, and we're down to 4.8, 4.9 today. So anytime you've got that much brass walking around, any enlisted Marine knows walk the other way, go find something to do because there's trouble. And I think there's a few things we can do about it. First off, we need to take a look at why do we have this, and I think we've convinced ourselves that only that college educated officers can do certain technical jobs. And I'm here to tell you, if young private all the way to sergeant can't do it, we've probably made it too complex. And we've got some outstanding NCOs in the American military. It's the hallmark of the military. We need to get back to empowering them to do their job. And I think one of the big things is we've got to enforce pushing leadership to the lowest levels. We've got to get it down to the sergeants and let them make decisions and empower them to make those decisions. Also, we should look at officer ranks. We've got a tendency in the American military by law, but there's a lot of service requirements where you can only be at a certain rank for so long before you either promote or you get out. And I think that's the wrong approach. And I look forward to, I think we need to be advocating for if we've got a highly effective captain, but the guy would make an awful major, keep him as a captain. Like if he's doing outstanding work, like let's have him stay as a captain. Like I think we need to be a little bit more flexible there. The other stuff that really want to look at though is and we see this in corporate America too, is how many managers versus how many workers. How many leaders to how many managers. And I think anytime that ratio goes down, the bureaucracy goes up, and the actual work, in this case the war fighting, the trigger pulling, goes down. We hire officers by nature are bureaucrats. Like the office is in the name. We hire them to do those kind of things, but when you hire multiples, they're going to create work that really at the end of the day is not meaningful. And I think this probably would echo strongly with President Trump and Department of Government Efficiency, but there's some very strong truth in that. Lastly, and I'd kind of throw this kind of gets to one of my other points, is we've created this bureaucracy where we wait our turn, and we need to get back to promoting lethality. And I say not just saying we're going to be more lethal, but no, we're going to literally promote the most lethal officers and NCOs and staff NCOs and young soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians. We're going to promote the best and brightest, and so we need to remove barriers to promotion. Stop making them wait their turn. Promote them as fast as they are competent, and make the less competent compete with the more competent. If you have met minimum statutory time and grade requirements, guess what? You're going on the next promotion board, and you might be competing against somebody who's been in that same spot for 10 years, and let the boards decide who's best and most qualified. So those are the big ones. The last one I'd kind of point to, and this goes back to my officer reform and things like that. We need to take a hard look at the officer appointments process. The president, with the consent of the Senate, has a lot of control. Just like political appointments, officers are appointed by the president. There's a lot of control there, and I think there needs to be a very strong reevaluation of what officers are doing, who is worthy of a further appointment, or who is worthy. Maybe we need to go through an entire reappointments process and reappoint the entire officer corps, as political as it's gotten. So a lot to unpack there, but the bottom line is, the only way we get more trigger pullers, more service members who are actually doing the work and making the DoD more lethal, we've got to give them the power to do that and make more of them, and have less managers sitting over top of them.
Yeah, all good points. Well, let's take some questions from the audience. Shell is our host over there. Go ahead, Shell. I see the hands.
We have Wib, sir.
Thank you, Shell. Thank you, Colonel. Major Simmons, thank you for your service. I am currently a USMC cyber auxiliary. I have 35 years experience in cybersecurity, And I have joined up, I have volunteered for the Marines to provide my expertise to train Marines. And this started back in 2019.
You have a question for the Colonel, Webb?
Yes. So during the Trump administration, we had all sorts of tasks and requests. And then once Biden took over, there was nothing. Are you guys planning on reinvigorating our like the cyber auxiliary and other similar programs that already exist?
Well, that's a great question, and I think to be clear, I don't speak for the Trump administration. I am a talking pundit at this point, and I really appreciate Colonel Maness letting me come on and talk and just share my opinions. But what I would say, I was at Headquarters Marine Corps actually doing reserve integration at that point in time when the cyber stuff was going on, and it's a perfect case in point of us coming up with these hybrid entry points to service. Why are we going to recruit somebody and spend the next 10 years training them to maybe be moderately good as a cyber operator when we can go out and hire somebody with 35 years of experience, possibly even pull them into the reserves, acknowledging that may not be a full retirement, but give you the support you need and have you training Marines and things like that. So I would expect, this again, just my opinion is, our job in the DoD is to give the president and the country a shelf of capability. We want to make sure that President Trump has the most lethal capability and the threat of force imaginable. And we know President Trump is actually a master negotiator and has sued for peace many times and gotten what he wants and what the nation wants, which is peace. But he's able to do that through strength. And I think I would expect the way hybrid war has gone over the last few years, the Cold Wars that we find ourselves in now, those cyber capabilities would probably be well utilized, or at least we would want to have them on the shelf and ready to pull off the shelf very quickly.
Yeah, your point about lateral entry and everything, and Webb, I'll just add my 2 cents, which is not the Trump administration's either. But I would expect that those programs, if they are known by the incoming team, and the president's picking a lot of people like Russ Vought at OMB, and the team that he's picked for OMB, most of them have worked for Russ at OMB in the 45 administration. So he's picking a lot of people below the top levels that have worked in these policy areas before. So keep pushing from your level, push the buttons from your level, Webb, so that information floats up. And somebody, I think, is going to be there to catch it, because, there's a lot of smart Americans, and we're all looking for this positive change. And sometimes that changes back to what was actually working. And that's one of the things. So I like your ideas, though, Stephen, about more lateral entry. We had flying sergeants back when we were making Farm Boys flying sergeants, and I've always wanted to see flying sergeants, especially in the UAV area in the Air Force, unmanned aerial vehicles, because it would be perfect for them. As a matter of fact, the job I did in the B-1 as a backseater is done by an enlisted person in the box for the combat UAVs anyway. So I think we should push for those types of changes to manpower policy. That would solve a lot of things, and then the reduction in officer in general, but also really focused and initially at the top, I think is crucially important, and that'll help us trid out some of these people that made these terrible decisions over the last 4 years, especially as we look at the lower rungs below. When we come back, we'll see another clip from Hexa talking specifically about China, but I want to talk some more about how do we clean up the sitting officer corps as this administration comes in, because That is critically important. And more importantly is, what do you do once you clean it out? What do you fill it with? Who do you fill it back up with? And at what levels, I think is just as important. So we'll be right back with former Marine Corps Major Steve Simmons, manpower planning and policy expert, on the Rob Maness Show here on Truth Thursday.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now. And we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks, literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archives vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
Pentagon, it's in the book, the exact amount of years, but in the past X number of years, 10, 12, 15, the Pentagon has a perfect record in all of its war games against China. We lose every time inside the Pentagon war games. We know what our real capability. You see, we didn't even get to this part of the war on warriors. I mean, the military-industrial complex, the way we procure weapon systems. We're always, the way our system works, the way our bureaucratic system works, where the speed of weapons procurement works, we're always a decade behind in fighting the last war. Whereas China, we have, what did Rumsfeld say? You go to the war, the army you have. We have the army. China's building an army specifically dedicated to defeating the United States of America. That is their strategic outset. Take hypersonic missiles. So if our whole power projection platform is aircraft carriers and the ability to project power that way strategically around the globe. And yeah, we have a nuclear triad and all of that, but a big part of it. And if, 15 hypersonic missiles can take out our 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a conflict, what does that look like?
Yeah.
I mean, and if they've already got us by the balls economically, which you pointed out very well, with our grid, culturally, there's plenty of elite capture going on around the globe. I mean, and then microchips and everything. Why do they want Taiwan? They want to corner the market completely on the technological future. We can't even drive our cars without the stuff we need out of China these days. I mean, they have a full spectrum, long-term view of not just regional but global domination, and we have our heads up our asses.
Yeah.
And that's the terrorist threat of our border. By the way, China probably has more people here, as many or more than these terrorist organizations plan to.
You know what they're.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show here on Truth Thursday, and we're live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast, and we're talking about how do we fix our military because it's weak today. You just heard the Secretary of Defense nominee talking about China and how it approaches its goals of capability and manpower from a leading perspective, and how the United States does it from a lagging perspective. And I'm going to throw up a chart here in a second when we bring our guest back in. My guest today is a former U.S. Marine Corps major and now Amazon employee, Steve Simmons, and he did manpower planning and policy at Headquarters Marine Corps, and has developed and written an article with some proposals that, fortunately, you wrote them down, and the incoming administration leadership needs to see this. I hope they get this in their hands, and I want to bring up to put the T cross and the I dot on what Pete Hegseth was just talking about. I want to bring up chart 5, the budget authority chart, Mr. Producer, and we'll talk to that. And I'll show you what he's talking about here through the dollar chart. As soon as we can get it up. There it is right there. Where did the funding go? If you take a look at this chart with the sand chart that we're focusing in there and the multicolors, The red is military personnel. Green is operations and maintenance. Purple is procurement. Blue is RD&T. That is development, testing, and evaluation, research, that kind of stuff. And then the very top, the orange, is construction and military family housing. And then there's some other stuff thrown in there with the darkest color. If you look to the right is 2028, where everything is leveled out. And you notice it's leveled out. Look at 2010 to 2012. That's when we were at the height of this nation-building part of the war in Afghanistan. We're still in Iraq and there and those kind of things. And you see the vast peak there, and the peak is being caused by what? Operations and maintenance. RDT&E is level. Military personnel is level. Procurement is a little bit higher, but it's really level with where we're at today. And that right there gets to what Pete was talking about when he's comparing us to the Chinese government and how they're looking at it. They're looking at it from the perspective of, we want to build an armed force that can destroy the United States of America in a war if we go with them. So they're leading on research and development and fielding new capabilities. And we're lagging. And the reason why we're lagging in large part is because that peak there is showing is the decisions that we've made to do nation-building wars and endless war policies, and then everything levels out to the right there. And you notice there that the O&M has gone up a little bit compared to 1998, 2000, and that kind of stuff, because we're still in endless war policy. We're just not at the height of combat operations. But we're still doing it, and that prevents us from really looking at our acquisition system and getting out in front of these new technologies so that we're preparing a U.S. military force and an allied military force that can actually be strong enough to be able to overcome the Chinese and deter them from ever doing things like acting violently on Taiwan. Anyway, do I capture that right, Steve?
Yeah, Rob, absolutely. And I think I think the alarming thing should be is the chart doesn't match the talking points. We hear about how inflation is causing cost overruns. We hear about how we don't have a personnel issue. Well, if you're procuring more equipment, you would expect there's a personnel cost increase. If inflation is what it is, why personnel costs remains constant with the Biden inflation that we've seen in the last 4 years. But we have seen, if you pull that chart up, there's a few blips right there from 22 to 24, and you see where the military was more than happy to let 95,000 personnel go so they could put more money into procurement, which we know where that went, Ukraine. And so all of a sudden we're investing in somebody else's wars while we're failing to even invest in our own defense readiness and focus on the real threats that are over the horizon there in the Pacific that we need to be very, very concerned about.
Absolutely right. That's the point I wanted to make there before we hit your last point, though, of improving the tooth-to-tail ratio and consolidating all this joint overlap we've got. Let's take our last question. I think we've got a question over with the live audience. Shell, go ahead.
We have Lieutenant Colonel Larry Broxer.
Yeah, howdy, sir. Thank you for coming on the show. My question is, you talked about restoring the warrior ethos, and you're right, we need to recruit that. How do you plan on doing that? And more importantly, you also talked about promoting the warriors inside the force. How do you plan on doing that?
So warrior ethos. First off, we talked about restoring the trust at the beginning. We've got new recruits coming in. We've got to get the moral backbone back infused into the military, and I think that's going to help because we've got to get these warriors back in and put them in positions where they can lead troops and be in front of troops. And it's not good enough you've got recruits coming in. You've got to bring in people from middle to even senior leadership to infuse the ranks at all levels with leadership and that warrior ethos. Beyond that, though, there's a few things that we can do. First off, if we look at how incentives happen right now, and I I don't have the stuff because it's all behind vaults and things like that. But there's a crisis of who wants command in the military, and command has become taking command of a unit, taking on these senior enlisted leadership roles. It's become a burden and not an honor, and it becomes an exercise in risk mitigation. So what's happened is many of our most effective leaders are actually avoiding command. We've seen this especially in smaller boards, usually oftentimes in the flying communities where there's fewer and fewer individuals willing to take on the responsibility of command because it's not worth it. There's a higher chance they're going to get relieved if they make a decision, if they make a strong decision that is the right decision, but it's not politically favorable. So we've got to reinforce that. We want the war fighters in command, and part of that is we have to get back to a merit-based culture. And what I propose is let's start bonusing off of performance. Stop bonusing off of just, well, you're the first in line and you happen to have an MOS that we want to keep around this year. Let's start bonusing based on performance. If we've got officers and enlisted who perform in the top 10%, adopt the corporate mindset, bonus them, give them more money, incentivize them to keep performing at that higher level, and incentivize everyone else to start performing at that level. The other thing is, tie bonuses to skill qualifications. We've got, personnel who go to these, very advanced technical schools and, come back with, skill degrees, and we're talking, whether it's the special operations forces or other key schools that make the service more lethal. Let's pay them for that. Let's identify that. Let's tie bonus structure to that. And that's all stuff that we can do within the service. You talk about, though, like restoring that moral backbone, that moral fiber. It's not just about pay. It's about leadership guidance. And I think the first thing we can do is when we get to promotion boards, we've got to take a very strong look at the guidance that we provide for promotion boards and what we emphasize and hold for both promotion as well as command boards and things like that. Who are we going to entrust with responsibility? And it does not need to be the individual who checked all the boxes, went to schools, and had a command at the right time at a lower level. It needs to be the individuals who deployed, who have a record of higher retention rates in their commands, who have a record of improved lethality, who are recognized as being the innovative thinkers. And that may mean that you've got a young officer who took a few extra risks but gets results, and his troops are staying around for that. We need to take a very hard look at how we're doing guidance right now. Right now, the guidance going into most promotion boards is you need to promote X number of minorities, X number of individuals who have this kind of schooling, and oh, by the way, if they have any bad paper at all anywhere in their career, just throw it in the trash and don't talk about it. So I think we need to cultivate a culture that's willing to innovate, willing to take some risks, and you're going to get a whole different leadership culture in the military that's going to infuse and restore that moral backbone that you talk about.
Yeah, I think the specialist communities, like personnel, the general, people that get promoted to general and admiral and personnel in all the services, will take exception to this. But what I'm hearing is what I believe for quite some time now is we need a return to all of the senior leaders in each of the military branches have to come from trigger puller communities, really, to be honest with you, primarily. Get them some experience in things like logistics, and personnel, maybe for a short period of time if you need to do that. But the senior folks, and you can have less general officers and admirals if you do this, because you won't need those specialist generals at the 2, 3, and 4-star level. Maybe top them out at 1-star if we still need those specialties. But we've got to get the operators and trigger pullers back in command of the units, and also all the way up to the top of the services. Don't we? We've got about a minute left. Steve, this goes by fast, especially with a subject like this, but you've done a great job. I appreciate it. Remind folks where they can find you and anything else you're working on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to keep on typing some of these papers, just putting them out. Again, like I mentioned, I'm primarily on X at Simmons Actual, Substack, same name. So feel free to reach out. there on X, always interacting. DM me, message me. I'll get back to you if you've got further questions. Let's have the conversation. Goal with all of this, again, is we want to have these conversations because we want to reform the DOD. We want to restore the DOD and, make our nation more lethal. And, President Trump, Pete Hegseth, everybody else down the line, they need our support as Americans, patriots, and, we owe it to them to support them and have these conversations.
Absolutely right, and try to get this info to the key decision makers that are in the incoming administration. Thanks a lot for your time, my friend. We'll get you back on at some point in the future, I'm sure. Monday is another Monday. We're not going to call it More War Monday yet because the guest is still an open discussion right now, but I will see you this coming Monday on the Rob Maness Show here at Worldview Tube and X Spaces Simulcast.